Also, just as a reminder, for more Microsoft webcasts, you can visit microsoft.com/webcast. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's MSDN GeekSpeak webcast, Real-World SQL Server Integration Services Stories with Matthew Roche. Now, without any further delay, I'm going to turn the floor over to today's first presenter, Glenn Gordon.
Great, thanks. All right, hello all the GeekSpeak listeners out there. Welcome to another installation of our GeekSpeak webcast series. It's one where you get to ask the questions of the experts that we bring on. My name is Glenn Gordon. I am a developer evangelist with Microsoft, and I present MSDN events around the country, and I also present webcasts. But today's presentation is not so much going through a slide deck and scripted demos. It's more about bringing you on and giving you an opportunity to ask questions. So continue to send your questions in. We've had a few sent in through our GeekSpeak blog that we posted earlier. And we want to hear your questions for our expert we have today, which we'll bring on in a little bit. So my co-host who's actually out in Seattle this week is Lynn Langett. Lynn, how's it going out in Seattle?
Hey, it's going great, Glenn. I'm actually sitting in my hotel room looking out the window at sunshine, so I feel like I'm almost home.
Oh gosh, like one of the 3 days up there with sunshine, huh?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm up for an internal employee technical training conference, so I'm getting involved in all kinds of new technologies. It's for Microsoft employees only, and it's something we invest in every 6 months so that we're current on all the new technologies. So
yep,
it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm going to jump up here to the slide that has our lovely photos on here so people know who it is they're hearing from, and they can read about our background and that sort of thing. But and I actually have to give you a heads up. I'm just getting over a cold or a sore throat, so I'm not going to be doing a lot of the talking today. I'm going to leave that mostly to Lynn.
Well, that's usually not a problem for anybody that's listened to any of these other GeekSpeak.
You got it. So today's guest, I remember you and I chatted briefly about this person about a month or so ago before we got him on the GeekSpeak. So since you have some background with Matthew, why don't you introduce him to the GeekSpeak audience?
Great. Well, Matthew and I kind of go way back. We're both Microsoft certified trainers, and before I joined Microsoft, we worked on several projects together. Matthew is not only an excellent developer, a trainer, he also worked with me on a recent book that we've produced on, it's called Foundations of SQL Server 2005 Business Intelligence. He was my technical reviewer, and it's really a pleasure to have him on. He's an expert in BI technologies, and had an interesting thing happen to him recently at TechEd. So with that, I don't know if Matthew wants to add a bit more about his background and tell us what happened at TechEd.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I assume that the interesting thing at TechEd that Lynn is mentioning is Microsoft's Iron Architect competition. I had such a great week at TechEd that it's difficult to sort out what was the most exciting thing, but the Iron Architect competition is something that Microsoft has been doing at TechEd for the last few years, both TechEd US and TechEd Europe at least. And basically what they do is they have a competition that is styled after the Iron Chef cooking show, and they will present online the week before the conference a business problem. So here is a business problem that we need to solve. In this case, it was extending in a very specific way the attendee registration and lodging experience for TechEd 2008. And interested software architects can create and present a proposal for how they would solve the problem. Basically, how would you run the project? What technology would you use? How does it address the requirements and other details that they post for the problem? There were a total of 4 finalists that they had up presenting on Thursday night at the show. I ended up being the victor for the competition. It was a great experience. The thing that I thought was perfect for me was that the problem that they had seemed like a very good fit for SQL Server Analysis Services data mining, using some of the clustering and segmentation algorithms in SSAS. And I actually had the opportunity to sit down and run some of my ideas by Donald Farmer, who has recently taken over the data mining group. So I went in with a great deal of confidence. So it was a very good conference.
Well, congratulations. I mean, winning the Iron Architect competition by defending your proposal live on stage is really quite an accomplishment. So we're really pleased to have you on.
Thank you very much.
We're here to talk about SSIS. So with that, we're going to get into the GeekSpeak slide. And the way this works, if you're new to our format, is a little bit different than a traditional MSDN webcast, as Glenn said. Matthew has some stuff to show. He has some demos. But we really want to drive this webcast off of your questions. So before Matthew gets into demos, what I'd like him to do is kind of set a context for working in SSIS as a developer, because we realize that some of you on this call might not have really worked with it at all, might just be curious from a developer standpoint why it's interesting and what you need to know to get started. So go ahead, Matthew.
All right, thank you very much, Lynn. And one of the other things that I took away from TechEd that was very interesting was speaking with other people there about integration services and the SQL Server 2005 BI platform in general. I attended a few different sessions that were community-driven, bird of a feather sessions, they call them at TechEd, and was sort of surprised to hear that a lot of the questions that were coming up around SSIS were not the super deep architectural, 300 or 400 level questions. It seemed like a lot of people were either coming in from DTS, data transformation services back in the SQL 7 and SQL 2000 days, or were coming in from more of a traditional development background, and were really looking for, how do I get my feet wet? Where do I start? What do I look at? And from my perspective, I have been a very data-centric developer for the last 10 or 15 years, but I've also been more of a traditional developer as well, so C#, .NET, ASP.NET, VB, and C++ back in the day. So what I see for people coming in from a more traditional development is basically trying to find out, what tools do I have? How do I run a project? How do I organize things? And one of the best things for SSIS, from my perspective, is that it is a real development tool. So the Business Intelligence Development Studio, the main tool set that you will use to build SSIS packages, is Visual Studio 2005. It's just new designers and plugins for Visual Studio. So the tools and the techniques that you will use are very similar. You can have solutions and projects just like you would with a .NET application. You have a lot of the same windows, debugging or output windows and so on. And in that context, there's a lot of similarity, a lot of familiarity coming in for people who are moving from a more traditional development environment. In addition to that, there are lots of opportunities for, quote-unquote, real development as well. So even though building SSIS packages is generally more of a drag-and-drop operation than it is a writing C# or writing VB operation, there are still opportunities to include script in your packages, either using the script task in SSIS control flow or the script component in SSIS data flow. There's also opportunities to develop your own components as compiled .NET assemblies. And one of the things that you'll find very useful moving forward when running larger SSIS projects is there's some things that Visual Studio just does not do, and because of that, there is a .NET object model that sits on top of SSIS. So you can programmatically create, execute, edit, and so on your packages, so that for times when going through the tools inside Visual Studio isn't really the most efficient way to do it, you can script things or use C# or VB.NET, whatever your favorite .NET development tool is, to automate a lot of the common tasks that you find yourself doing over and over again.
So Matthew, if I hear you, what you're trying to communicate to our listeners is that SSIS has really grown up from the days of DTS, and it's really become a full-on development platform.
Oh, absolutely, and one of the things that I like to say if I'm speaking about SSIS is that back in the days of SQL 7 and SQL 2000, I would just as soon chew off my own mouse finger rather than use DTS.
I don't know if we needed that graphic reference there.
Well, DTS was a simple tool for doing simple things.
Yes.
And most of the time, if you needed to copy data from one table to another, it was great. But if you needed to do something that was part of a real-world application, it fell down very quickly. So just as moving from VB6 to VB.NET, things got a lot more complex when they got a lot more powerful, but the learning curve wasn't all that bad. It's a very similar move from DTS to SSIS. It is a true enterprise scale platform, great performance, great flexibility, but if you're coming from DTS, a lot of the things that were simple to do in the past may be a little bit trickier to do now, simply because the tool is more complex and more robust.
Yep, and I do see we have some questions in the queue for Matthew, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Coming in from Bill, we have our first question. Can you use SSIS on the version of SQL 2005 that is installed on Small Business Server 2003 R2?
That is an excellent question, and to be honest with you, I have no idea. So I know that you cannot use it with SQL Server 2005 Express Edition. You can use it with higher editions. So I've used it with both Standard and Enterprise. I'm honestly not 100% certain about Workgroup. I would have to research to see what edition is included with Small Business Server. I have honestly not touched Small Business Server since the 2000 days, so I have simply not looked there, so I apologize.
Well, Glenn or I will research that, and in the post-show resources that we put up on our GeekSpeak blog, blogs.msdn.com/geekspeak, we'll include the answer to Bill's question. So good question, Bill. And coming in from Maya, we've got, could you please show how to integrate SSRS reports with SSIS?
So the way that I have done this traditionally, and just before Maya starts squirming, I believe this is not the question that she's actually asking. What I've done traditionally is not using SSIS actually as a data source directly for SSRS reports. What I have had the most success with for my BI projects is using instead SSIS as the platform to get data into a SQL Server database or an analysis services database on which the reports can be based. I know that you can use integration services as a data source for reporting services, but in the real world I have not done it, and honestly if you were to ask me to do it, or since you did ask me to do it, right here putting together an ad hoc demo, I just do not have the comfort level there. So I guess I'm 0 for 2 so far.
Right, okay. Then we're going into Stan. When comparing in terms of data manipulation, what or where is the general performance gain, if any, from using SSIS compared with T-SQL on linked servers or bulk load? That's a very common question. I had that very frequently too when I was teaching SSIS.
So the performance comparison between using SSIS data flows and bulk load is probably on the 5 to 10% level. So I've never seen formal benchmarks, but generally using bulk load, if your data is in the restricted shape that bulk load requires. So basically if you're using bulk load, using bulk insert or BCP, what you have to do is you need to make sure that there is a direct match. So all of your data types, all of your fields and so on are identical or practically identical between your source and your destination. So if you have the ability to use that, you can sometimes see or generally see a 5 to 10% performance improvement over using SSIS data flows. What I have found is that most of the projects that I work on, you don't have that opportunity. You need to do some sort of massaging, be it doing lookups to make sure that you're not loading duplicate data, doing calculations or data type transformations as part of the data flow. And even if you have those things, which is what I see 99% of the time in my projects, your performance is still phenomenal. So one of the projects that I'm working on is a data warehousing project for computer configuration data. one of our source systems, for most of the installations that we're looking with, they'll generate on the order of 30 to 50 million records per day, so relatively wide records when we're feeding into our fact tables. And the performance that we see on standard server, so we've got a remote SQL server as our source, we have a local SQL server as our destination, so the SSAS packages are running on the same server where our destination databases are located, and we will see regularly performance on the order of 1.8 to 2 million rows per minute.
Wow. Source
to destination, including reading it from the source, sending it over the network, and so on. So this is typical speeds. Some environments we see greater. Some usually where there is a network bottleneck it will be less. But the performance that I see for SSAS data flows, phenomenal.
Great. Matthew, we're getting some questions around demonstration, so perhaps you can share your desktop out and just open up the SSIS environment, and then I'll kind of guide you through some of the questions.
All righty. So can other people see my desktop?
Yeah.
Yep, we can see it.
Coming through just fine.
All
I'll
righty.
tell you what the questions are, and maybe you can do a couple of ad hoc demos of just the interface and the environment. First, from AA, is there any debugging in SSIS? So if you can incorporate that. Then from Anthony, I would like to see an SSIS demo which demonstrates manipulation of data with script if possible, and then with a component as data being imported to a database. I think it's just general functionality is kind of what I'm reading there. And then I have a question about deployment from the pool, which you can kind of generally address, and then I'll get to the specific question as you go through the demo. And then a question from Narayan about Katmai. So we talked about that as well, which is SQL 2008.
So can you give me just a quick review of the topics to cover? We have debugging, we have scripting, we have Katmai, and there was one other that I've missed.
Just kind of general interface, maybe build up a simple package, just to give the audience who maybe is not as familiar with the interface. Kind of, when you talk about tasks and components and the flow, just kind of go tour through the interface a bit for the audience.
All right. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right back to my desktop, and please, everyone, forgive me if I am moving slowly. Although I use SSIS every day, I do not use live meeting every day, so if I'm moving more slowly, I apologize. One of the things that drives me crazy when people are talking about SSIS development is they refer to the Business Intelligence Development Studio as BIDS, as if it were a separate application. I mentioned this up front. This is really Visual Studio, so as a developer, I always go start to run, type in dev end, and launch it. It's coming up with Visual Studio Team Suite, which is the edition that I use, MSDN subscriber, so you've got to have all the tools to do the job. Basically what we have here to go in and create a project, just as if we would with a C# or ASP.NET project, we will choose Create. And here, since we have SQL Server 2005 Developer Edition installed, we have all of our BI projects available. So I am going to put in a project name, SSIS Demo 1. Please pardon my typing. And basically what will come up is a project with a few different nodes in Solution Explorer and one sample package available. So I mentioned up front that this is a real development environment. We're using Visual Studio, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that you will find and eventually be frustrated by is that the project structure for SSIS is not as flexible as it is for C# or other .NET projects. Basically, the folders that you see here are the folders that are available. There's a data sources folder that will basically allow you to define reusable connections. A data source views folder that will allow you to go through and graphically define subsets of the data available through those connections, although I've never found a real purpose to use that through or 4 integration services projects, and a packages folder. So this is where the actual executable packages that you'll be creating are located, and you can drag and drop whatever you want into miscellaneous. But all of these are stored in the same file system folder underneath. You do not have the ability to go through and create arbitrary folders like you would otherwise. So in here as well, if we look off to the left, we'll see we have the toolbox, same Visual Studio toolbox that we're used to seeing, although instead of having different types of controls, here we have control flow items. We can scroll down. There's another area for maintenance plan tasks, which is basically for those tasks that are specific to creating database maintenance plans for doing server maintenance and so on. So probably the simplest package to start with is going to be to create a data flow task. So I'm going to take this, drag it onto my control flow surface. Basically what control flow is inside SSIS is your programming logic. This is what would be your main subroutine if you were creating a VB application. So if we want to go through and create whatever logic is necessary, I'm going to create 2 things here, drag out here 2 script tasks. Probably not going to actually put any script in these, certainly not right away. Basically the script task is a great placeholder because when you drag in and drop it onto your control flow surface, it works by default. So it's a great, I'm going to put something here, but I'm not quite sure what task. I'm going to click on the data flow task. You notice there's a little green arrow hanging down from this. I'm going to drag this to one of the script tasks and click back on the data flow task. Another arrow will appear. I'm going to drag this to the other script task. So the control flow that we have here is execute the data flow, and then if it succeeds, go on and execute both of these script tasks in parallel. So parallelism sort of built in right from the beginning. If I right-click on either one of these arrows, we can change the type of constraint that is bound to it. So I could say that I want to execute one of these if the data flow task fails, another one if the data flow task succeeds. So
like how it changes one of the lines to red there. So
absolutely. And there's lots of additional things that we can do here. I'm not going to drill in right now because it's not critical to either of the questions or any of the questions that are asked. But basically what you can do is define expressions or additional constraints that will allow you to say, I'm going to do this thing if it succeeds and this variable has this value. You can get pretty complex here to build up the logic, the control flow that controls how the package itself will execute. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to right-click on the data flow task and choose Edit. And basically what I've done here is I've changed from the control flow designer to the data flow designer. One of the things that is very different moving from DTS to SSIS is that you can now have multiple separate data flows within a single package. And the way that SSIS does this is by having a separate designer for each data flow task. So you can define the logic, the execution logic on your control flow, and then whenever you need to move data from one place to another place, you can drill down into the specific data flows here.
And that's where you get a different set of tools, which I see over there, things like copy column and data conversion.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. So when we move into the data flow, the tools that are available inside the toolbox are different. I'm going to collapse the data flow transformations area here to show you the 3 main things. We have data sources, we have data destinations, and we have data transformations. And what we'll do is we're going to start off with a data source. We've got to get our data from somewhere, right? So I'm going to right-click on my data source, choose Edit. Notice that when we drop it here, it has a little red X on it. Basically, we don't have the data that we need to make this run. And instead of going in and choosing Edit, what I'm actually going to do first is I'm going to create a connection manager. So in order to connect to any resources outside of the package, SSIS uses connection managers, which are specific types of objects that wrap around a flat file connection, an OLEDB connection, an SMTP connection if you want to send mail, for example. It gives us very well-defined boundaries between what's inside our package and what's outside of the package. So I'm going to choose New OLADB connection, and I am going to connect to an Oracle database that I have on the network. So I have a connection saved already going against the default Scott schema. So Scott, Tiger, and we have our emp table that we're probably going to get some data from. Once we have this connection manager, now I can right-click on the data source component, choose Edit, and here I can select from a list of tables or views that exist on the target server. I apologize for the slow time here. I did not go back through and hit that Oracle server right before we started, so I'm not sure if it is my network or this live meeting here. So we can go through and we can choose a table or view. 99% of the time, that's not what you want to do. What you'll want to do is to have an explicit select statement so that you can pick and choose only those tables and rows that you want to work with. The biggest performance improvements that I see when I'm working with consulting clients going through and helping them either build SSIS solutions or performance tune existing SSIS solutions, the biggest changes involve simply working with only the data that you need. And this is a paradigm or a best practice that is common across any type of database-driven development. As long as you're only working with the data that you need, then half the battle is won. I'm going to click on Preview here, which is a quick sanity check to make sure that my syntax is correct. Got a little error message, little warning saying that the data source isn't letting us know what our coalition or code page is. We see that we have the data coming out. So,
all right, Matthew, you're going along here so well, but the questions are piling up, which is great.
All right.
So kind of maybe put a pause in your demo, because you probably have to demo some more. So Glenn and I, you want to switch off here? Glenn, you want to?
Yeah, I thought some that are actually relevant to the demo you were building there. So Anthony wants to know if you can include Excel or XML as source for the data source, if that's an option.
As in, can I do it in the demo today, or can it be done?
I guess.
So absolutely. So there are two ways to include Excel. One of them is to use an OLADB connection manager, and another one, let me choose just New Connection here. So another one is there actually is an Excel connection manager, which is simply a slightly restricted and refined OLADB connection. So there is a ton of data stored in Excel out there. I don't have anything to demo right now. I don't have an Excel spreadsheet ready to pull in, but you can do that. There also is an XML data source where you can specify with basically an XPath query to identify the data that you want to pull in. You can also write to Excel files, but there is no XML destination. So writing to the XML is a little bit more complex than reading from it. So the answer to both of those questions is yes. So I'll stop talking.
How about the XML that may come out of a web service? Do you have a way to access that, or is it just an XML file?
Well, there actually is a web service task, so you can connect to that. I've never had a lot of luck with that personally, and seeing some of the questions that have been posted and the answers posted to them on the SSIS forums on the MSDN website, which is certainly a link that we want to share on the blog afterwards. Most people have had more success by having either a custom data source to pull in from a specific web service, or else doing some pre-processing outside of SSIS. So you can connect to a web service, but the tools and technologies that are built into SSIS aren't really great for pulling in complex data. So any real-world web service that I've attempted to connect to, SSIS has not done a great job with.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And then back on the control flow, you dropped in those script tasks, which I guess prompted Tom to ask the question, can the script task have VB.NET projects or solutions or modules or anything like that?
Let me do this. Let me finish up the data flow here real quick, and I'll switch back to the control flow. So the short answer is yes, sort of.
Okay.
So the script task, how do you like that? You know that I'm a consultant when?
Or a long-time trainer.
So the main thing that I like to point out about the script task is that it isn't really script. So when you are going through and adding code to a script task, what you're actually adding is VB.NET code, so it's not VB script. When I think of script, I think of weakly typed data.
Sure.
I think of VB script and JavaScript, and that's not what we're dealing with in SSIS. So anytime that you are anytime that you're going through and adding script either through the script task in control flow or the script component in data flow, you're actually dealing with strongly typed, full, real .NET language, and because of that, you have the advantages of a lightweight environment. It's using Visual Studio for Applications, or VSA, so that you can include the code built into your project, built into your package, but you don't actually have scripting per se. It's not interpreted. It's not weakly typed. So you do have a lot of flexibility. So a lot of flexibility for what you put in your script task. And in addition to that, you can also reference external assemblies. So if you have an existing C# or J# or C++ or whatever assembly, managed C++ that is, assembly that you want to reference from your package, you can reference that from inside and keep your code in the DLL where it is today, and simply call to it from the VB script, or sorry, the VB.NET code inside your control flow.
You must have snuck a look at the question.
I was going to say.
There's actually one in there about DLLs. That's pretty funny.
So and actually, let me do this. So I'm going to switch back over to control flow.
All right.
And I promise we won't abandon the data flow. I'm jumping around more than I would normally like to, but I think this is a good thing to follow. I'm going to right-click on one of these script tasks. I'm going to choose Edit. One of the things that bugged me for the first 6 months or so I was using SSIS is that it's not right-click properties. It's always right-click edit. And if you choose right-click properties, it will take you down to the little Visual Studio properties window. So right-click edit. I've gone to the script tab, and here we see that we have some general properties that we can set. Notice there is a script language property. The only option here is VB.NET. So why did they put this in? They wanted to have either VB or C# available for the Yukon, the 2005 release, but it was either only have VB or not ship on time.
Ship on time, right.
They chose to ship. I heard at TechEd they are planning on supporting C# in script components and script tasks in Katmai, so we're happy there. We have options for compiling script into binary code. The default is true. Basically, this is going to determine whether or not your package contains an actual compiled assembly or just the source code that will then get compiled when the package is run. So we can also specify different variables. SSIS gives us the concept of package variables that we define for sharing information between tasks in the package itself. If you want those to be available either read-only or read-write from within your script, the easiest way to do that is to list them in your script task or script component properties, and then they'll be available through the then they'll be available inside your VB.NET code. So I clicked on that. Design Script button. After a couple seconds, the Visual Studio for Applications window opened. This is where you add all of your code either for your script task or your script component. What you can see here is that we have a script main class, and it has a public submain entry point. Basically, this is where we will execute our code in SSIS. So if we have code that we want to put into a script task, we can put it in here, and we can add, in theory, any type of code that we would add in any .NET application. So the question, if I recall correctly, was can you have projects and modules and so on and so forth? Absolutely. So you can define as many additional classes, as many additional files, as many additional properties, methods, and so on that you want, and you can put them in here as long as you can call it from this submain. And at the end, you just need to remember to say did it succeed or did it fail? So,
and I assume in this development environment you've got IntelliSense and debugging.
absolutely. Although for debugging in the script task works pretty well. Debugging in the script component in Dataflow, for the most part, is non-existent. So the reason for that was sort of a trade-off between performance and stability and ease of debugging, and they went towards the former. So you do have the ability to debug in here, but with that said, we've got the flexibility, and when I was first working with SSIS, coming from a .NET development background and coming from sort of DTS, I avoided it when I can, so certainly not a DTS expert. Please don't ask me questions on DTS. But one of the things that I wanted to do was, oh wow, I can now, instead of putting in all this crappy ActiveX code I had to put in to make DTS work, I can now put in real .NET code, and I was so excited that I could put in real .NET code here. And what I have found time and time again is whenever I think about putting my own .NET code into packages, it's the wrong thing to do. There is a task that's built in that will let me do it without needing to write my own custom
And you know that
code.
I've found that when I was working in production with SSIS, and that ties right into Tom's question, which really leads kind of back to your demo, taking it to the next level. This is a very common question. Not sure what should go into which flow. Control flow is the logic of your application, and data flow is defining input and output. So going a little bit more deeply into what you can accomplish in control flow and data flow is just something that, in working with developers out in the field, I've found as a common question area. So maybe you could just show a couple more things in your sample package.
And actually what I would like to do is I would like to abandon the demo and move to a
something you've pre-created?
Yeah, something that I pre-created. So just for the context, this is actually a real package, kind of dumbed down a little bit from one of the projects that I'm working on. I mentioned that with one of my consulting clients, we are dealing with computer configuration data. So basically what we're doing is we're building a business intelligence layer and a full suite of applications based on the Microsoft BI platform on top of both change data, compliance data, things along those lines, so things that define the health of your IT organization. And one of the things that we're dealing with is not all of the information we need is coming from our core systems, from the enterprise configuration management systems. We also need to bring in information from service desk or ticketing systems such as Remedy or Mercury or other third-party applications that are out there. And right now we're trying to come up with some solutions on what's the best way to have a meaningful package that can be reused, and to give us a place to say, at this point I'm going to put in something specific to Mercury, specific to Remedy, specific to a customized source system, while having the greatest scope of reuse and the smallest scope of custom code. So, and please don't ask me the best solution yet, because we're sort of going through and fighting with it. But I realized that this is probably the best place, or the best package that I have to show off for differences between control flow and data flow and how packages can relate to each other. So first of all, I'd like to apologize for the incredibly cluttered screen. Normally I have two monitors running at 1920 by 1200, and today we only have one at 1024 by 768. So I will be doing a lot of resizing. But let me point out over here that I have a master package. I have extract packages for moving incident data and then mappings between incidents and machines from the source system to the data warehouse. And then I have some that are specific to client 1 source systems or client 2 source systems. So basically this is Remedy or Mercury for these two different systems, even though it's not in the package name. So with this as the context, I'm going to switch over into full screen mode and basically show the master package that we're dealing with. So here, we have a few housekeeping things. So since we're loading into a data warehouse, we need to have auditability or traceability. So before we move any data, we get a unique audit key that basically represents the execution of this package. So for this given time that we run the package, or the set of packages, we have a unique audit key that we're going to put into all of the tables that we're putting the data, so we can always trace it back. Auditing is very important. We have a sequence container that basically says, here's the real work we're doing. We're going to execute these two different packages, and each one of these tasks here is an execute package task. So the master is basically, think of this as your sub-main routine inside a traditional console application. So you're not going to put all of your logic there. The main is just going to say, all right, I start, I do my housekeeping, and then I call off to these other subroutines, which in this case are our child packages or worker packages. And down below, and I apologize for the arrows here, one thing the SSIS is not great at in its current version is the maturity of its designers, so your lines will never stay quite where you want them to. But if the container succeeds, then I will update my audit table with success information. Otherwise, I will update it with failure information. Earlier on, we talked about connection managers. Each one of these packages has a connection manager associated with it that basically points it to, what child package am I executing. And Lynn, let me seed you with a reminder. Don't let me leave this demo without talking about expressions. So we need to come back to expressions.
Yeah, they're very important.
But I don't want to get distracted here.
Yep.
So I'm going to come down. So since I'm in full screen mode, I can't actually go. All right, so I'm going to have to exit full screen mode, apologize for that, to come back and find Solution Explorer. So basically, I want to drill down into one of these child packages.
And while Matthew is doing this design pattern of parent-child packages is really very important to understand as a best practice when you're starting to work in the SSIS environment. Matthew, do you know of any resources, sample packages, white papers that can help our developers to learn this pattern? Because it's new for most people working with it.
So there are two places where I would that I frequently point people. One of them is Project Real, which is a reference implementation. It's not just SSIS, but it's the whole Microsoft BI suite. So if you were to use your favorite search engine to find Project Real online, it has documentation plus packages, SQL databases, SSIS databases, and great gobs of sample data. If there's any one resource, if you're the type of person who learns by looking at stuff that other people have already done, that's the place to go. The other thing that I recommend to everyone is a book called the Microsoft Data Warehouse Toolkit. It's written by Ralph Kimball, or it's by the Kimball Group, and Kimball is one of the fathers of data warehousing, and he has a lot of great guidelines for the things that are important in real-world data warehousing systems. The book, the Data Warehouse Toolkit, is not just about SSIS, but this pattern of having master packages and child packages, and in particular, ensuring that each package loads exactly one target table. That is probably the most important single thing from having maintainable real-world projects.
Boy, would I agree with that, having worked on several real-world projects.
So at first it seems, oh, what an overkill, blah, blah, blah. How come I have to have all these different packages when I really only need one? So if you ever find yourself arguing that, keep in mind that most real-world projects will have dozens, sometimes hundreds of packages, and unless you have a well-defined way to manage it from the beginning, it becomes a nightmare. So just as code starts off simple and gets complex, the same sort of thing is true for SSIS. So, but to get back into the demo, I've gone down into a child package, and we're looking at its control flow here. So inside the control flow, we have a set of logic, a set of steps that we need to do for the package executing end to end. So most of the logic that I have in the majority of my packages is auditing logic. So most packages, what they do is they move data from one place to another place. And I will have here, get the beginning row count out of the table, get an audit key for this package's execution, just like we saw in the master package at the beginning, get the ending row count, update the audit table at the end. So basically, these things are basic steps that we need to do around the package execution as a whole, but not necessarily specific to the data flow. They're things that are take place around the movement of the data itself. And let's actually drill down, again exiting full screen and drilling down in here. Let's take a look at one of our data flow packages. So in the context of reuse and abstraction, so the little project that we're looking at here, what I'm doing in this project is experimenting with having the data flow being the level of customization. So normally you would have the data flow task inside your worker package. The way that I have this specific project set up, oh look, Visual Studio is busy, so it's going to take a minute for this guy to run.
I've actually been jumping on answering some of the questions because your demo
has been number.
Yeah, your demo has been generating a large number of questions. So are you at a point where you can take some questions here?
I certainly can. As soon as this data flow loads, I want to answer the what goes in the control flow and what goes in the data flow with a little graphical aid here.
Okay.
So once the data flow loads up, and it looks like it's just having it. Anytime that you load a data flow, it goes out and makes sure that it can get to all of the
external.
Let's see if
there are any really straightforward questions here we can just knock out of the queue. Right. This is actually a great question. Tom, you're asking a really good question today. When would you create a VB.NET application as opposed to an SSIS package? That's really a fundamental question probably for a lot of people listening who are just getting into SSIS. What are the compelling business scenarios that cause you to use this tool?
So I'm actually going to come up with a Donald Farmer quote as a lead in there. So one of the things Donald Farmer said at TechEd, and Donald Farmer was the original program manager for SSIS, rolling your own ETL system is kind of like rolling your own cigarette. If you roll it too tightly, you don't get any throughput. So if an application is specifically designed to move data from one place to another place, I would do it in SSIS. If an application is a general purpose line of business application and it may involve moving some data, well, odds are I would look at .NET or a non-SSIS platform first. So the places, the comparisons that I see, or the questions that I see asked most often, are usually not .NET versus SSIS, but Transact SQL versus SSIS and so on. So if I were moving data between a source and a destination inside the same database, I would probably look at doing it in a stored procedure first. If I was looking at moving data between a source database and a destination database on the same server, I might look at Transact SQL, but would start leaning towards SSIS. And if I had to go between a remote and local, or two different remote data sources with lots of things going on to the data in between, I would lean heavily towards SSIS. So one of the things that SSIS gives you is a high-performance data pipeline, and it's a logical pipeline, not a physical one, but that's neither here nor there for right now. So basically what SSIS gives you is high performance built in, and the ability to graphically define the things that you're doing with the data, and that's something that is very difficult to get from a custom application or something that you're building yourself. So if we take a look at the data flow that has finally come up, and it looks like I've done something to hose one of my connections, which is why it took so long to validate. But here we're pulling data out of Remedy. There's a select statement in here. I'm taking the rows and storing them in a variable for auditing later on. I'm taking some of the columns that are declared as single byte text in the source system, where I'm putting them into nvarchar or Unicode text columns in the destination system, doing some data type conversions. The OLEDB provider for Oracle that Microsoft has come up with doesn't want to let me do that here, so we're doing it in SSIS. Here we're going through and we're making sure that the rows that we're pulling in don't already exist in the target database. So there is a lookup component where very quickly and easily we can say we're taking the data that's coming in and we're cross-referencing it against this lookup query, and if the records do not already exist, send them down this data flow path. If they do already exist, send them down this one. So here we can go in and say we're counting the number of records that already exist, store it in a variable, we audit it later on.
Matthew, I'm going to jump in because again, the questions are piling up. You're really inspiring people to ask lots of questions. It's so difficult to try to tackle topics with the complexity of SSIS in this short amount of time that we have, but we do promise our attendees that we're going to get their questions answered. So what I think we're going to ask you to do is kind of leave this open as a point of reference, because it's good for people to have a visual, and then go through some of the questions in the queue. So Glenn, do you want to start going through some of the questions?
Sure. Bill's got one here. Are there tools for, I think this is comparing SSIS packages, for example, to see what a customer has modified to break a package after you configure a custom package for them, and they call a few months later and say it doesn't work anymore? So that's an interesting question. I guess Bill's a consultant there.
So so the short answer is yes, there is, and the real answer is no, there's not. So DTSX packages are XML files. Any XML comparison tool will do the trick. But because things like the layout of packages and so on are included in that comparison, it is not as simple as simply diffing the two files and having it say, well, this task has changed. You actually need to look at the structure that's underneath. You can sign your packages, and if you're using the DTExec utility to execute them, which 99% of the time you will, there is an option that says only execute signed packages. So even though the tool support is not particularly robust, there are ways to get around that. I would honestly say that the solution for that is have a contract. So have something in your SLA that says if you change it, here is the signature for the version that we give you. If you change it, we don't support it, and here are our hourly or daily rates to fix it. But the comparison tools are very weak. One of the things that I've done using the SSIS.NET object model is come up with some rudimentary tools for my own purposes to compare specific things between packages, but I've never seen a good utility for doing real robust comparison.
Fair enough. Makes sense. There's a question here from Lynn. I'll sort of boil it down. Her question is about the performance of the flat file manager in SSIS, and she actually says it's really unforgiving compared to DTS. Do you have any insight into that?
For the performance or for the typing that it does? So just as a disclaimer, I haven't done production work against flat file sources since the very first SSIS project that I worked on back in late 2005, so my memory's kind of weak here. For the files that I was working with, performance was excellent, but it was very unforgiving in the context of data types and things along those lines.
Could be. In this case, she's talking about SAP extracted reports. And she's looking for, her words are, a more flexible flat file manager control in the future to more closely match DTS. So yeah, typing. She just clarified that it's because of the typing.
Okay. So to be honest with you, what I would do in that situation, as I understand it, is I would go from the flat file manager, treating everything as text so that the typing is less of a concern. Go from there into a SQL Server staging area, and then from there do explicit typecasts in the select statement going from SQL to whatever downstream component it is. It is extra work, but one of the things that SSIS is incredibly retentive about is data typing. It is incredibly metadata driven and metadata bound, so that most of the things that you do are heavily dependent on the source and destination data types, and unless you have an exact match, 9 times out of 10 SSIS will scream at you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think because I've tried to do things in the past where you try to do it all in one step and things just don't work out the way that you expect. So chunking it makes a lot more sense in that scenario, I think.
Yeah, but having the flat file manager as the source is limiting. So if the data types are what are biting you here, SSIS is great, but you may need to work around some of its proclivities by having the interim storage step.
Makes sense. Okay.
And then as a follow-on, I see from Stan, is there some sort of file system data provider where you can loop through files based on a file system pattern? Or would one have to use .NET? If yes, how? And kind of, again, in the interest of time, short answer as is possible.
You know that I don't do well with short answers, Lynn, but I'll try. So yes, there is. In control flow in SSIS, there are different containers. We looked at the sequence container, but there's also a loop container and a for each loop container. And out of the box, you can point the for each loop container at a folder and say loop over the files that are in it, and then put inside the container whatever tasks you want, which would generally be a task to actually perform the data flow task, and then a file system task to move the file that you just loaded in from the main folder to a backup folder, for example. So absolutely a piece of cake. And if you look at SQL Server 2005 books online, the tutorials for SSIS are built around that specific question. So if you look in there, there's step-by-steps for how to set it up and make it work. It's beautiful.
Great. And from Pool, I have, what is the difference between simply importing an SSIS package in the SSIS store versus running the deployment wizard to add it? Which one is better?
So they are both two different ways of doing the same thing. I tend to lean towards storing my SSIS packages on the file system and not in the SSIS store. So basically there are three different locations, for people who haven't looked at this yet, three locations where you can have your SSIS packages to run them. You can store them in the MSDB database. You can store them in what's sort of a magic file system folder that the SSIS service can manage, or you can store them in arbitrary file system locations. I tend to lean towards the third one, but to the best of my understanding, the only difference in the two different options that were presented is the tool that you use. So for the most part, whatever tool you use is going to fall back and under the hood use the dtutil command line utility, the same interface that it has, whether you're using the deployment utility or SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, to do it.
Great. And then from AA, I have a question. Can SSIS packages be executed from SQL 2005 Express?
There's ambiguity in the question, so I do not know. Let me just say that SQL Server 2005 Express Edition does not include integration services. So if you had, for example, I'm trying to come up with an example to make this work here, and I'm not being able to put it together without jumping through a lot of hoops mentally. So the short answer is no. The long answer is, in order to have integration services and execute them at all, you need to have a valid SQL Server non-Express license. So not only do you not get the software with Express, the license for Express doesn't include it. So theoretically, you could have Express kick off a .NET application that use the .NET API to execute a package on another server. So if you want to look at it that way, you could, but the real answer is no. Express Edition does not include SSIS.
Thanks. Great. I think we're about at the top of the hour here. Believe it or not, it goes by so quickly. We do have a few remaining questions, so those of you that have questions, we kind of tried to pick out the more general ones, and we're going to get your questions answered, but we really do only have the hour for the formal presentation. So with that, we're gonna thank you very much, Matthew, for your efforts and your time, and turn this back over to Tracy.
Well, let's go ahead and head to our last slide first that has our links.
Oh, that's right. We need that.
We've got the geekSpeak blog, blogs on msdn.com/geekspeak. You can look for a post there in a couple of days that has the references that Matthew has shared with us. We've also got recordings available through there, as well as on Channel 9. Got my blog and Lynn's blog listed here, as well as Matthew's website and blog, and also promoting the MSDN events that we do live around the country. So again, thanks to Matthew. It was a great GeekSpeak, lots of good in-depth questions and good speculative things to talk about.
And who do we have next week, Glenn, on GeekSpeak?
I have to pull up my calendar.
I've actually got it out in front of me. We've got our first Australian. GeekSpeak is truly international. We don't let people go to bed. So we have Mick Badron, who is an MVP in BizTalk and Workflow. So he's coming on next Wednesday. So hopefully some of you will join us for that.
Sounds great.
Okay, Tracy, if you want to take over.
Excellent. Thanks, Lynn. I do want to remind everybody that for more information, they can print a PDF of today's session. To do that, just go to the File menu in your upper navigation bar. Also, please feel free to continue to submit your questions into the Q&A panel. You just want to type those in and hit the Ask button. Also, I'm going to be posting a survey here in just a minute. If you would all please take a moment to fill it out before you log off. We really do appreciate your feedback. As a reminder for upcoming and previously recorded webcasts, you can visit Microsoft.com/webcast. You can go here to access this webcast, which should be available for download in about 24 hours. Also, if you have any webcast content ideas, something out there you'd like to see, we'd love to hear from you. Please take note of this link here. And for anybody who's interested in receiving a free 14-day trial of Microsoft Office Live Meeting, you'll want to visit Microsoft.com/presentlive. And here is the survey from our session today. Please follow the links provided to complete today's webcast evaluation. And with that, I do want to extend a very special thank you to Lynn, Glenn, and Matthew for your presentation today and for answering all the great questions we had come through the queue. Ladies and gentlemen, this will conclude today's session. The audience may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's presentation.